Been a series of reports today that the President is calling a special cabinet meeting to discuss the idea of reversing current cabinet policy and extending the life of the older coal-fired power stations. News 24 is reporting that the two major power stations up for discussion are the Hedrina and Arnott power stations. They're due to be closed in the next few years and to make way for new renewable generation capacity. It was cabinet policy that they should be shut down in line with our goals to meet commitments to stop climate change. As you know, over the last few days, the Electricity Minister, Dr. President Cyril Ramaphosa, has said these plants should be kept open. Clyde Mallinson is an energy expert. He joins us now. Clyde, good afternoon to you. I really appreciate you coming in. Thank you. There's a lot to this story. Perhaps one of the first questions is to ask how difficult would it be to keep these plants going, and could they make a meaningful contribution to our grid?
Okay, well, just to answer the fact that you said that the ministers have decided to shut them. It's actually Eskom that's decided to shut them down. They've reached end of life. There's certain things that have to pass safety tests, boiler tube strength, etc. And so they're due to be shut down. But I actually, in this particular instance, agree with the minister that right here, right now, we shouldn't shut them down if they are still able to safely operate. But we shouldn't be looking to run them or keep them operating for beyond when we meant to actually finally shut them down, if that makes sense. So a slowing down of the shutdown and then an acceleration of the shutdown where we use the time when they can produce some energy now to do what we should have been doing for the last 5 years, building replacement.
It boils down, I suppose, to cost and to the energy availability factor. And I presume that the older a power station, the lower its EAF would be.
That's not quite true. Okay. Some of the old ones, like some, if they've been well looked after, actually have higher availability factors than some of the new ones. And we only have to look at Kusile to understand that some of the new ones are not exactly shining lights when it comes to availability factor. But I just want to say that in South Africa, we are exceptionally poor at shutting things down. So I think, as far as I know, we've got something like 6,800 mines in South Africa that haven't been officially shut down. They go through a chain of, let's keep them going longer, let's sell them off to another operator, let's do this, and it moves down the chain until eventually you have artisanal miners running those mines. And it looks like we're running into the same problem with our coal plant and our coal mines, where we're unable to make that step of this thing is meant to be shut down now. Let's plan it, and let's not end up in a mayhem of not having planned the shutdown. And that's where we are today. We haven't done it in a planned fashion, and we're now running around trying to make ad hoc decisions that we shouldn't have been put in the position to make. It's as if there wasn't a funeral plan. And everyone's now saying, who's going to pay and who's going to do this? And it's just very chaotic at the moment, I'm afraid.
Well, okay, I'm going to come back to the chaos because yes, I agree with you. I still think it might be important to know how expensive it would be to keep them running. In other words, is it economical to do this? I mean, I accept what you say, we should still use them. But is it going to cost us more money or not? Because Eskom also won't be allowed to invest in new generation capacity. You know, the other story that's developing, yes, as you know, yes, is that government will give it 252 billion rand to pay off the debt, but it won't be allowed to develop new generation capacity. And I can just imagine the legal argument about whether refurbishing a boiler is new generation capacity. But I presume it isn't. So would it be expensive to keep these plants going?
There comes a time when the cost of keeping them running is no longer warranted. At the moment, you could argue that the cost of keeping them running for a little bit longer is good payback if you compare the cost of diesel or, in fact, the cost of load shedding. But you can only see that in the context of having a plan to say this is a stopgap and this is how long we're going to have to or expect to keep them running. What is not conscionable is extending their life by 5 or 10 or 15 years with retrofits and, we're basically going to fly in the face of environmental laws if we don't retrofit them. And retrofitting them would be akin to putting brand new catalytic exhaust on an old 60s banger. It's just not a good idea. So I'm talking about short term, if it's working now, at a reasonable cost. We keep it running, but in no circumstances do we look to try and prolong it beyond into the medium or long term.
One of the reports is that the idea would be to sell these power stations to the private sector. A private company would run them,
yes.
Presumably put up the capital to keep them going, and then charge Eskom for the electricity. Yeah. Would that be viable, or would it be better to keep them in Eskom?
Yeah, here we go with the mines all over again. You know, if Goldfields or Anglo sell to Harmony, if Harmony sell to Sibanye, Sibanye sell to the next lot, and we eventually end up where Aurora close the gates and put a padlock on the door and tell everyone they must go home. There hasn't been any pay for the last 3 months. So I'm afraid any private sector players stepping up now, the first thing they'll say is, I'm assuming we're not responsible for environmental air emissions, because otherwise we don't want this plant. And then someone would have to say, well, you actually have to retrofit 300 billion rands worth of flue gas desulfurization. And the private sector will say, thank you very much. Can't we just build wind and solar and storage? You know, what's the problem? So I can't see private sector people stepping up to the plate without getting a certified backing that they will not be responsible for further pollution, and they'll also not be responsible for the eventual shutting down of the plant, the creation of new jobs for the workers, the environmental rehabilitation, all of those things. They'll say, we're not taking those on board. We'll run it for you for a while, but we're not taking that on board. And that's where I see the problem would be. No one would want. It's like, would you want to buy Coburg now? And they say, well, you know, the funds for decommissioning Coburg, we've got them on paper, but we haven't actually got any funds. So if you take over Coburg today, you're going to be liable for the waste disposal in 20 years' time. What's that going to cost? Well, we don't really want to tell you because we're trying to make a... So I can't see that being a sensible argument.
I sometimes wonder about the half-life of Quebec. Within all of this, there's another thing which I don't know if I quite understand. Up until this point, insofar as I know, every single coal-fired power plant in this country has been run by Eskom probably from, what, the 1930s, with the exception of maybe the Kelvin power plant in Joburg.
Yes.
So is there really a private sector that can run a coal-fired power plant?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of companies who are very specialist in fixing things in coal plants. I know many of the people personally. So when you say Eskom are doing a lot of the maintenance, they've often pulled in private sector specialist crews. What people don't understand is it's not just the turbines and the gensets. You've got to have conveyor belts working. You've got to have stacking systems for the coal working. You've got to have the boilers working. You've got to have the cooling systems working. So these different pools of expertise that have to be brought in. Some of it resides in Eskom. Some of it resides in the private sector. Some of it, of the high-level stuff at new power stations like Kusile and Medupi, resides, unfortunately, with the likes of big corporates like ABB and others. And we don't really want to go there in this discussion today. But there's certain areas where the expertise comes from offshore. But a lot of the maintenance in that is done locally. And all maintenance, the important thing, it's like putting on heel balm. It doesn't matter which brand you use, you just need to do it every morning. And if you don't, you can't come with a very expensive brand after not having applied it for 6 months and expect you're not going to have cracked heels. Sorry, it's a very personal experience.
But yes, you basically have to do it, and you can't now ask the private sector to pay for the maintenance that should have been done 5 years ago.
Yeah, you know, some of the water softening methods they use on the plants, it has to be dosed. It's like a swimming pool. You can't not put chlorine in for a year and then think you can catch up by putting 2 tubs of chlorine in one. It doesn't work like that. You've got to dose it correctly. Same with medications. The dosage is essential. And I think a lot of those systems of monitoring and dosing and real-time thing have broken down at Eskom. And there's possibly, I don't know that this is the case, but there's possibly a guy with a stopwatch and a little bucket saying time to dose. And if he misses a dose, well, you know, so what? Just double dose next? I don't know. But these are complex systems that need to be run in a sophisticated fashion.
There's another aspect to all of this, never mind which decision Cabinet makes. which is that in a crisis it can sometimes be important to sort of stick to a plan, make a plan and stick to it. You made the point, you corrected me and thank you for that Eskom had made the decision to close these coal-fired power stations, and I can see another legal argument about whether Eskom or the minister makes the decision, but never mind that. So we had what I understood to be policy. Cabinet could now reverse that policy. And we've seen so many other reversals. We had a national state of disaster, then we didn't. We had an exception that was going to come for the Public Finance Management Act, and then we didn't. Does it worry you that we seem to have these sort of series of reversals all on electricity, the burning question that we face?
What worries me is if we think of electricity as a car, then having a reversal on policy means we've still got a gear left. I'm worried that we won't even be able to reverse in future, never mind go forward. So I have no qualms with reversal in policy because there's lots of energy policy that is just wrong. And I wish we had reversed it 5 years ago. So I'm not anti-changing policy per se, but the change needs to be good, forward-looking change, not retrospective change. So I'm all for policy change, but not for the wrong policy change, if that makes sense. So I wouldn't contest and say we shouldn't reverse something if we think we've made the wrong decision. I'm saying what is the correct decision, not just for the reversal in one little sector, but how are we going to cover for that so that we can go forward after having had to reverse for a while.
There's so many moving parts to the electricity crisis that we face. I mean, there are many moving parts to the similar transition in Germany, but they didn't have the same stress that I think we have at the moment because of load shedding. Part of it is that we are expecting more and more people to have solar power on their roofs. You've been a big fan of that, I know. We see that companies are doing that. In a way, this is the only thing that will reduce demand. There are consequences. It's very bad for municipalities, for example. I just wonder sometimes when I see governments deciding to do one thing and then deciding to do something else, or a special cabinet meeting to maybe look at changing policy, if government is almost being seen, I choose my words carefully, being seen to lose control of the situation.
Well, it's interesting that you use the word moving parts, because in a coal-fired power station it would be interesting to do an analysis of how many moving parts there are, and I can tell you it runs into tens of thousands. On a solar plant, there's actually no moving parts, except for the guy who's busy cleaning the panels to maximize the output. On a wind farm, there's essentially moving parts. The turbine spins and in the gearbox. So it's when you've got lots of moving parts that things can go wrong more easily. So yes, there are a lot of moving parts, both in policy and in actual plant. But the fewer moving parts you have generally, the easier it is to maintain and stay on course. So, yeah. Solar panels at home, it's great. I don't think it's a big threat. The biggest threat to municipalities at the moment is the loss of sales they're experiencing by not being able to sell during load shedding. The revenue streams to municipalities are now up to 20% of their normal revenue. Obviously, they're buying 20% less, but their markup is 20% lower. That dwarfs loss of sales that they've had through people having solar on their roof at this point in time. It's not to say that that will remain so.
I mean, many people complain that even despite stage 6 load shedding, the electricity bill is exactly the same.
Well, you know, when you've got batteries and things that kick on, you tend to change your pattern. My wife was just laughing, speaking to her sister in Australia, and she said, I'm putting the washing in. And her sister said, why at 11 o'clock at night? Because she said, well, we've got water and we've got electricity for the next 3 hours, I hope. And so I'm doing washing at night. And that means that you still run the washing machine on the same number. You just do it in between load shedding bouts. And then, of course, if you've got a battery inverter backup like I have, which keeps beeping these days when we go into stage 4 hours of load shedding, it doesn't last, it actually uses more electricity because the battery only has a round-trip efficiency of maybe 70%. So you put 100 units of electricity in and you get 70 out. And so, yeah, I don't think we would see a massive... And, of course, the bills have gone up. You know, the electricity price has just gone up 20%. So if you were saving 20% on your usage, well, you're back to square one now.
Clyde Mallinson, as always, you're a bit like a business reporter with so much good news. Thank you very much indeed. Energy expert with us. Do appreciate it.